You start seeing this internal narrative that people are walking around with that is as self-defeating as it gets, and it's terrifying. And so I'm thrilled to, by all means, please continue to tell us about these experiences, and especially those who ended up helping you out of them, because I'm scared and I'm frustrated, and I want to see these situations being resolved in healthy and caring ways.
Thank you for saying that.
Welcome to the Braemar Life Skills Academy podcast, where we'll explore the evolving world of education and student well-being. I'm your host, Mike Helsby, and in Season 2, we're focused on personal well-being, self-regulation, and innovative learning strategies for school and everyday life. Whether you're an educator, parent, student, or education thinker, this podcast is for you. Join us for insightful discussions, valuable perspectives, and a fresh look at the future of learning. Let's take that step into the future of education together. Welcome back to another episode of the Braemar Life Skills Academy podcast. As always, I'm your host, Mike Helsby, and today I'm joined by Mina Alves. Mina is a passionate lifelong learner and an advocate for social justice. Mina is deeply committed to fostering impactful change. With a master's degree in education focused on social justice from OISE at the University of Toronto, and a bachelor's degree in psychology from Toronto Metropolitan University, Mina has dedicated nearly a decade to working with and within marginalized communities. During their undergraduate studies, they served as a program coordinator at the Academic Accommodations Support Center, managing the Are You Noted program and providing crucial support to students requiring accommodations. They later joined the Thriving in Action team, collaborating on resilience training programs to enhance student well-being. And in recognition of their contributions, Mina received the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Award, as well as the Marion Creary Leadership Award at Toronto Metropolitan University. They also worked as the Accessibility Inclusion Program Coordinator at the Royal Ontario Museum, supporting inclusion projects and accessibility tours. While completing their master's degree at the University of Toronto, Mina worked at Students for Barrier-Free Access, passionately advocating for intersectional access, equity, inclusion, and disability justice. Following graduation, Mina served as the Center Coordinator for the Center for Global Disability Studies at U of T Scarborough, an emerging research center dedicated to transdisciplinary research in disability studies. And currently, as a junior learning strategist with Awakened Learning, Mina facilitates personalized, equitable learning strategies, drawing on their diverse background to promote accessibility and inclusion. With a profound commitment to interdependence and disability justice, Mina continues to inspire positive change through education and advocacy. I mean, if anyone's wondering why we bring a guest like Mina Alves on, that bio speaks for itself. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, thanks for having me here.
So we're welcoming you as part of our three-part series on accessibility in education. We've had some great conversations preceding this and really looking to round out and bring some substance to those conversations by sort of diving deep into this massive range of experiences, this real depth of experience you've had, both living and advocating for inclusivity and access throughout your educational career. I just want to take a few seconds to breathe and give you the space to just help these listeners understand a little bit about your life, where you're coming from, and why this theme matters so much to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mike, for that really generous introduction. And thank you for having me. I've never done a podcast before, so
right.
I'm really excited to be here. I've never
We're honored to have you.
been talking on one. But yeah, really excited to share my ideas about neurodiversity, learning disabilities, and how learning strategies really were transformative in my life as someone who has learning disabilities and really loves to learn, but I really struggle with school. So I have a really deeply personal interest in this subject. And I wanted to start off by sharing some of my core beliefs around education and also just the way I think about things to help kind of guide our discussion.
I think that'll be a good way to frame things. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, great. So I believe that every student, human, we're all unique and we all have inherent worth and deserve to have our needs met um, with compassion and never judgment. I'm really committed to changing how we think about differences and social norms. And I really believe that's possible for a future in education where we can recognize diversity instead of pathologizing some as normal, some as abnormal. I really value curiosity, collaboration. Um, I really encourage exploration, experimentation, and creativity, and prioritizing relational care with one another to foster like supporting learning environments. Um, so yeah, that's kind of like the foundation of the way I think about things. And I've also had really incredible mentors that I've been lucky to connect with. Something I hold really close to my heart day to day, but especially when I'm thinking of what it means to be in relation to each other when we're learning, is from Dr. Eve Tuck. I learned that we learn best when we're taught by someone who loves us. And I learned this in a co-mentoring session we had during my undergraduate degree. And this was on the topic of methodology for our research projects. Um, as well, during my time working for Thriving in Action, um, I was really lucky to have the mentors of Dr. Adina Kara Schaefer and Dr. Diana Breacher. And it was so phenomenal to witness students who were really struggling make such, um, like, have such a transformative process. It was the first time I've really like witnessed a group of people working together collaboratively in that way with like a focus on wellness. And there was just so much care there, and um, it was really beautiful. That project meant a lot to me for my life.
Mm.
And I also believe that learning is endless, ongoing, um, requires adaptation, collaboration. Um, um, Ideas are flexible and fluid and open to change. So I try to approach every interaction with openness to take on new ideas, think about things differently, and not to stay closed off to learning something new. Um, yeah, and outside of my work in education, I'm a really avid reader. I'm a lifelong public library lover.
Hmm.
Um, I knit a lot, especially during French class, which I'm currently enrolled in 30 hours a week.
Wow.
And I love nature. I love swimming in waterfalls and rivers, and that's me in a in a nutshell. Yeah.
It's not always easy to put ourselves in nutshells, but you've done a really nice job there.
Thanks.
I hope listeners will hear a lot of ideas there that they will have seen reflected and represented in this podcast already. Two ideas that really stood out to me, and I'll always make a point of raising these up. The first, something that you said, Dr. Eve Tuck passed on to you, and that's that learning happens best when you learn from someone who loves you or who shows love
Yes.
to you.
Yeah.
The voice that I immediately heard in my head, as I have so many times during my education career, is that of the great educator Rita Pierson, who, in her very, very popular TED Talk, which first switched me onto her work, told an anecdote about working with a fellow teacher who came into the staff room frustrated one day and said, "These kids just aren't learning." And Rita's message to her was one of going deeper with them, understanding their lives better, right? Bringing holistic care into the classroom.
Yeah.
Her peers' response to this was, "That's not my job. My job is to
Mm,
teach. Their job is to learn. That's that." And
mm.
Rita Pearson's emphatic, and this is the voice that I hear in my head constantly, her retort was, "Don't you know that kids don't learn from people they don't like?"
Yeah.
And I mean, it's it's a difficult thing to convey to a lot of educators who come up
Mm-hmm.
in a system that is based on meritocracy and that is
Yeah.
based on competition and a sort of transactionalism of knowledge, a
Yeah.
top-down passing on of knowledge. Um, but if you spend enough time in classrooms and you really pay attention to the kids or the students, I should say, not just in your classroom, but as they grow through their time in your school or perhaps beyond that, you see that the stuff that sticks is the stuff that was reciprocated between two people who trusted one another, two people
Mm-hmm.
who had care. And I hear that. I hear that in what you're saying matters most to you, and I see it in the work that you've done in the past 10 years and beyond. Um, I know I said there were two ideas that resonated. I'll be much briefer with the second. Uh, Strengths-based learning over deficit-based learning, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think so much more is done when we identify uh, alongside the learner in a collaborative effort what their strengths are and what that might afford them in terms of opportunities in life, as opposed to what their deficits are and what are
Yep.
the gaps we need to fill or the fractures that we need to
Mm-hmm.
fuse. Um, and there's good science around all of this that we can talk about, and maybe you can help
Yeah.
us understand it a little bit better. I'll stop there again. Um, your passion for this area and your amazing work with groups like TMU and we know I've interviewed Dr. Diana Breacher in the past, and she was super helpful in my understanding of resilience. Dr. Dina Kara Schaefer is just a godsend for our podcast, and can't say enough
Mm-hmm.
about her. But that great work that you've been doing is informed by a background where you weren't always met as a learner.
Yeah.
Um, can you start with us there? Talk to us about that background and how what it felt like and how it led into this career of yours.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. And I just wanted to add on, yeah, I do see the like rigidity of some teachers and like not wanting to be open to, I guess, trying something different. That's definitely fostered in like the educational system. It just keeps repeating itself. But um, yeah, I just really agree with everything you were saying there. But yeah, to get to your question, I didn't know about neurodiversity growing up or have any understanding of it until I was halfway through my undergraduate degree and I had a professor help me get accommodations. But before then, I had never had um, a teacher or any adult in my life um, really suggest anything to me like that or offer me any support in that way. That was really difficult to go through school as a young person. Um, I internalized a lot what teachers would tell me, what why I was having a hard time. I wasn't paying attention, or if I just tried harder, or you know, um, focused more, then I could be a good student. But I didn't understand. No one was telling me like, how do you even pay attention? I'm not sure. What does trying harder look like? Um, I through education, I was getting kicked out of class a lot um, for doing things that I didn't know were abnormal, like just smiling in the distance or like talking and giggling to myself. I would later come to understand that as neurodiversity, but at the time I was just so genuinely confused and felt very alone and um, wasn't really sure why I was getting in trouble for just doing things that um, like I was living my own life to myself. And then through high school, things got significantly harder. Trying to do assignments, I would pull all-nighters. I had no concept of wellness either, or like how to take care of myself.
Mm.
I would be scrambling to finish assignments or um, hyper focus on a subject that wasn't necessarily transferable to school, even if it would be the same topic. So I felt like my knowledge wasn't really being captured in school, and I would end up internalizing that I'm not, I'm just not a good student, I'm not bright, I'm not a good learner. And that stays with you for a while. It's really hard to like undo all of that kind of social conditioning. Um, I would find it really hard to stay awake during classes, and I was never met with like curiosity from teachers asking, like, is everything okay? Um, you're falling asleep in class, but rather would be like reprimanded and shamed in front of everyone, which was really difficult. And it's hard to have the motivation to want to do well when there's everything, but also you're then being shamed by a teacher.
Mhm.
It doesn't really build that like relational rapport of like, okay, I really want to succeed. It kind of has the opposite effect there. Yeah, and I think what my teachers didn't know is I was really struggling. I wasn't, like trying to be difficult, which I would say that I don't think anyone is ever trying to be difficult or trying to be a problem. Um, and I really want to work towards changing seeing people as problems or their behavior as problematic, but getting more curious at what might be underneath the behaviors or differences. But yeah, had undiagnosed learning disabilities. I was working through my last 2 years of high school. I had a difficult home and personal life and had like a parent in cancer treatment. So there's just a whole lot going on. I wasn't getting any support or guidance through that. Um, and unsurprisingly, when I went on to my undergraduate degree, it just got harder
Mm.
without any knowledge or support. I failed a lot of courses my first 2 years, and there was a lot more pressure now because there was student loans involved, and paying for courses you're failing is really stressful. Um, and and something new that came up as a force in between me and learning was I started having a lot of confrontations with teachers that I probably would handle differently now as an adult, but at the time I did what I knew best, and um, there was some teachers who were teaching things I fundamentally disagreed with, and were teaching them as facts, and these things to me were oppressive, racist, transphobic, homophobic, and um, they weren't open to discussion about it. So I was getting kicked out of class again. And I stopped attending those classes, which makes it really hard to do well. Um, if you're fighting with your teachers and not attending courses because of it, it's really hard to do well. And
Yeah, no kidding.
getting marked a lot harder as well for, I guess, our differences in beliefs. Um, so that was kind of what was like standing in my way from learning a lot of the time. But to contrast that, I also um, in my last 3 years of my degree, like found incredible teachers and support staff um, who helped me get accommodations, supported my learning, and taught me how to do it for the first time. I think it's quite incredible looking back now that it took that long. Like it, I got all the way there without ever learning how is it that you learn? Like
Mm,
what what does learning actually look like? What does studying look like? How do you do it? I did not know before then. And they also cared about me as a person, and that was like monumental of a change for me. Um, I really value like reciprocity, mutual respect. I don't have the easiest time with authority, especially if it's someone who's like, I'm not going to care
I,
about you, but you have to respect me.
with an experience like yours, it's not hard to understand why.
Yeah. But I'm so eternally thankful to the people who did see me and really stood in my corner, really supported me. Were like open to me being curious, welcomed my questions. We didn't have to agree on everything, but there was always respect there for one another. Um, and they understood that life is difficult. So they supported me through difficult times without judgment. And unsurprisingly, that helps people bounce back quicker and um, do better work. Um, so being treated with respect and autonomy really helped even build my own motivation and also how I saw myself. If you go through most of your life thinking, I'm a problem, I'm not good at this, it really like crushes your spirit um, to think it's just like you're not capable of doing this thing.
Yeah, I want to just pause you there and then please continue.
Yeah.
Just to really hammer home and emphasize this dynamic that's at play in the lives of so many, especially very young people. Coming
Yes.
into school settings from, as you said, an infinite range of situations with a proportionate range of what our friend of the podcast, Jenny Samparisi, describes as invisible disabilities and invisible deficits, right?
Hmm.
Caring for someone who's going through cancer at home, getting poor sleep because you have an infant sibling who's crying all night,
Hmm.
dealing with parents arguing and not really
Yeah.
being sure how to deal with it. And then you enter a classroom as a young person where, one, none of that is recognized.
Hmm.
And two, your entirely predictable, entirely understandable responses to those things are are punished.
Yeah.
Are that you're taught that what is coming out of you naturally as a response to all of these forces
Hmm.
is wrong. Something inside of you is wrong or broken and needs to be repressed, eliminated, fixed. And we know, like, there's 60 years since Aaron Beck, we've understood how cognitive distortions like these arise better and better, and they live inside you. And they, as you've just described, they can live inside you well into adulthood. And we often don't notice them after a certain point. They become
Hmm.
so internalized, so natural to us. This voice that says something in you is wrong, it needs to be repressed. You almost should live in a state of default precarity, shame, guilt, and protectiveness or defensiveness.
Yeah.
And the more you understand that dynamic, it gets a little scary out here, especially as an educator, because you just start seeing it everywhere. You start seeing this internal narrative that people are walking around with that is as self defeating as it gets. And it's terrifying. Um, and so I'm thrilled to, by all means, please continue to tell us about these experiences and especially those who ended up helping you out of them because I'm scared and I'm frustrated and
Hmm.
I want to see uh, these situations being resolved in healthy and caring ways.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for saying that. And and even now, I see it in a different role now when I'm supporting students. They'll come to me and they have all these pressures, and it really gets in the way of their learning because they're thinking, oh, um, what what should I do? What is the correct thing to do, even when thinking of their future, instead of valuing their own internal compass and knowledge. like self-knowing. They're worried about like perceptions of their teachers or parents of the pressure we put on young people. I mean, even um, being, what is it, 16, 17, and having the pressure of this is the age you decide your career trajectory.
I want to go back in
Um,
time and figure out who decided that was the age we had to make this decision. Like, how many 17-year-olds have stood in front of their parents and been like, look at me. Do I look like I'm ready for university? Do I look like I have any idea what career I should be going
yeah,
into?
yeah. That's like looking back now, like I have so much compassion for myself of like, oh, I really was just trying my best. I felt like I was just flung into the world. And I didn't even know accommodations were a thing. Like I was in university, but I didn't know there was even support. I had no concept of anything. I didn't know you could drop courses if if you know, like all those courses I was taking.
That says
That
so
I was
much.
butting heads with professors, like would have been nice to know that I didn't have to be there, really, if I didn't want to. Um, and it's disheartening because even our program department, there is like a not a counselor, but kind of like a career counselor, or like a program counselor where they advise you on what to do if you're having a hard time. And that was the one thing I knew that there was. I was like, okay, there's that. So when I went to go see them, they were really discouraging. They were like, well, if you're having a hard time in school, you could drop out. You can, um, you could just leave. Didn't offer me any other alternative. But I knew that I love learning and I wanted to go to grad school. Um, so I was trying to communicate with her, like, what can I do to like help me get better grounded so I could reach this goal I would like to achieve. And she told me like, you're never gonna get into grad school. Don't bother trying. Just drop out. That was her advice.
Wow.
Just drop out of the program if you're struggling with it. And I'm I'm very fortunate that I did not take her advice, and um, I I, um, I got support in other ways, very thankfully, and went on to grad school with also very supportive teachers, which was incredible. But at the moment, I really didn't know of any other supports or that would have helped me succeed when I had the desire for it, which I think is important. Um, um, but yeah, I can talk about how I got accommodations because I think it was um, a pretty good example of having that kind of relational care, even though some te teachers or educators think it's not their job.
Yeah.
Um,
That's exactly where I was heading with this. Before you do, let's just set the stage a little
yeah,
bit.
for sure.
Um, I think it's pretty easy to understand, having listened to what you went through as a young person, the sorts of accommodations that you might have needed, that you might have looked for. But as somebody who's gone on to work in a lot of accommodation settings, whether it's for accessibility at ROM, U of T, TMU, you've done so much. What are the other, maybe in general, the most common sorts of accommodations and the
Mm.
situations that need to be addressed with more care that you're seeing?
That's a good question. Um, I think I related back to how I think about people that every accommodation needs to be personalized.
Mm,
It needs to be built on that relational aspect because even someone with the same disability, the same learning disability, different things are going to help different people. There's no kind of one size fits all, and it's the same for learning strategies. It takes a collaboration to find um, good fitting accommodations, good fitting support, even.
Hmm.
And so I think approaching accommodations from a point of, instead of, okay, these are the accommodations for this disability and this disability, like having it categorized like that. I think instead, um, it being individual, but also like, what is it that the person is struggling with, and what supports can we build around them to support them, instead of um, the other way, I think, is quite pathologizing too, and like what you mentioned before, like deficits based, and like um, just
Yeah.
just to,
Well,
yeah.
to one extent, I find sometimes I go too far perhaps with complaints and kind of just, just being exacerbate or not exacerbated. I guess just really upset at the lack of care and the lack of support in a lot of these settings. And like when you describe a counselor telling you like, well, if you can't hack it, maybe you should leave. Like that's just,
Hmm.
I'm aghast at that. But when we talk about the personalization of care and we say, I think rightly, that every individual case demands an individualized response, that can be quite daunting. I think
Mm.
for anyone in your position, in my position, in positions of caretaking and education, and so to give them their due, the resistance that people like Jenny Samparisi are facing as they try to bring awareness and education to faculty at TMU
Yeah.
around their responsibilities when it comes to accommodation. That resistance is somewhat understandable, and I think at least going into what I hope is this new age of education, recognizing the real change of perspective, the real paradigm shift and structural shifts that need to take place in order for what has previously been a one size fits all system
Yep.
to begin addressing the individual and meeting them where they are. That's it's not a small task,
Yeah.
and I get why people are hesitant towards it.
Yeah. I I do understand that as well, and um, I I guess to me, I'm like, it then becomes clear that teachers, educators need support too. Like there is not built-in support.
Mm,
Um, it sounds like teachers and educators maybe don't have the capacity to do that. Maybe they're being stretched um, really far without much support themselves or education. Um, I do know when I was in my undergrad at TMU and got my accommodations, but then having the accommodations be respected or followed through on. I'm not sure what the word is I'm looking for here, but that was another obstacle. And that was back in 2017. A lot of my teachers didn't even understand like what accommodations were or what some of the accommodations might look like. There was like missing education there, I think, which the accommodation support really did a lot of work to like advocate for the accommodations. But I had this one instance, if I could give like a anecdotal
please do.
um, experience. One of my accommodations was to have memory aids for exams because I really struggle with working memory. It was an approved accommodation. I worked with a learning strategy on how to create mnemonics, which is a really cool way of learning and is like a really cool like learned skill that takes a lot of effort. And I say this because when it came time for my exam and I handed in my mnemonic memory aid, which is, if I could give you a visual picture of it, I had emojis and names of people in my life who I made kind of like a narrative story in my mind to help me recall things.
Hmm.
I hand this paper of like emojis and colors and names of people in my life to my teacher, and she um, starts very aggressively telling me that it's cheating, um, which to me, it could not be cheating because um, any if it was cheating, if someone else had it, they'd be able to gather the answers, you know.
Right.
There was no like concept words on it or anything. And
Yeah.
it was clear that I had spent a lot of time, effort, skill into creating this memory aid for myself. To be accused of cheating an hour before the exam is incredibly stressful.
I can
Um,
imagine. I want people to just understand these memory aids a little bit better. I've spent some
yeah,
time
for sure.
designing these with some young folks. I work with ADHD populations, and these memory aids are not sheets that contain all the answers to a test, right? In fact, they are a physical artifact representing the exact processes of learning that
Mhm.
educators should be trying to emphasize in the lives of their learners. As you said, like I've heard what you described as mnemonics as something like part of building a mind palace, where you have
Yes.
yeah, and that's this is the technique that the people who win memory competitions use,
Hmm.
right? Like this is how we expand the human mind. This is how we grab huge quantities of information and distill it down into usually a narrative representation that our brain is much, much better at storing for long enough for us to recall it and then produce it
Yeah.
as knowledge. So to be accused of cheating, to be accused of it's one of my like top five bugaboo words, along with lazy
Hmm.
and procrastinate and a
Yeah.
few others, right? Like these are just bad explanations and inaccurate explanations for
Hmm.
what's really going on deep inside the learner, which is often a sincere effort to learn in the only way that is available to them. So I'm so sorry that that happened to you. That must have been devastating.
Yeah, it was extremely devastating. And, you know, already, I think exams are stressful for everyone in the first place, but I am even like an incredibly anxious, nervous person already.
Hmm.
And then to have my teacher, the person I know who will be marking my test, an hour before tell me that I'm cheating, telling me that the accommodation is like not valid. It's like, you know, really like downplaying it, um, putting me down as well. Like it was really just incredibly difficult to experience. And then there's no way after that experience you go into the exam feeling like confident and capable and um, ready to take an exam, you know?
Yeah.
Um, And yeah, it was really disheartening because I was really proud of it. I thought it was so cool. It was a new skill I learned, and it was like a new world opened up for me of learning, literally. Like you said, that is how learning happens. And um, I was so fascinated by it. I made like very intricate maps, and like I think a lot in terms of like colors and also, like I said, people in my life, like I'll think of someone I care about personally, and I could relate them to like a really intricate topic that I'd need to know, but otherwise wouldn't be able to recall. And it was sad that she wouldn't understand that. And I also found it interesting because I was in psychology. So a lot of my teachers are psychologists, and to me, I thought, you know, your it's your field. You would have like some better understanding of maybe what I'm experiencing, what I'm trying to do here. Um, but yeah, I guess there was just some
It goes to show you
differing there.
how entrenched some of this, the meritocratic
Yes.
structure of our education system is, as you just said, it's not something I've thought much about. But a lot of these teachers, like, this is your field. Like, you
Yeah.
should have some real insight into how the brain works and what we mean by quote unquote learning, because
Mm-hmm.
it's not reading a bunch of words on a page or listening to a lecture and then just repeating those words to yourself over and over again until that thing is sort of like imprinted on your brain and then
Somehow
just
magically
vomiting it out again,
absorbs.
right? Like, let's talk a little bit about that, because I think this is one of the reasons why words like cheating and lazy and procrastinate and others
Mhm.
get used. We don't have a very good conception of what it means to learn in our
Yeah.
culture, right? And when people tell you, well, you should try harder, or you should
Hmm.
focus up, right? Pay attention, right? Like,
Yeah.
and as you said, a lot of kids are hearing that and are immediately shutting down, because
Hmm.
when they hear it, they say to themselves, or maybe they don't even say to themselves, they just feel, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
I, I don't have any strategies for bringing attention to something that doesn't seem important to me,
Hmm.
right? And when you said you started falling asleep in class, I mean, it's hard to think of a more direct representation of that
Yeah.
fight, flight, or freeze response that is so often what our bodies do when we are under threat, and how many
Yeah.
students are under threat. So let's talk about what it means to learn. If you want to talk
Yeah.
about memory, focus, attention, what skills are you bringing to the people you're working with in your life, and maybe what has worked best to help you learn as you've gone through this process?
Yeah. That's so great. I'm taking in everything you're saying, and you're so right, about, the shutting down when you're just told, these kind of, um, blanket statements, I guess they
Mm-hmm.
would be, of like focus, or, try hard, but
They almost rely on that idea, that old idea of like I don't know if you've heard of
a
the
light bulb?
homunculus. No, the little man who sits on top of your brain. They used to believe this before we had
I don't know.
like brain surgery and stuff. There was
Mm,
literally this idea, and you can see it in old writings about the brain, that there was a sort of like a second being, and it was a
mm,
metaphor, I think, for the most part. But the second being is in the brain, sort of like turning the eyes to look at things, and, like, pushing the focus button or
mm,
the memory button, and that's like these things we tell to kids, these things that are rolling around still in our education language, sort of appeal to that idea that there's a
yeah,
homunculus that you can tell what to do.
yeah.
And for
I've
those
never
who
heard of
aren't
that.
aware, I know it's so weird. Maybe I'll post in the show notes a picture. So there's some diagrams of what this looks like that are pretty funny, from like the 1800s.
Wow,
Um,
that's great.
so for those who are unaware, there is no little man in the brain that you can just tell to pay attention. Instead of that, please go ahead. What do we mean by learning?
Yeah, what a big question. Uh, like, even when I think, like, gonna backtrack here. For myself, when I think of, I was told to like focus, just focus better. I think of like, what did I look like that wasn't communicating that I was focused or not, Um, because I would be fidgeting a lot. I would, draw in my notebook, all things that I think are, relatable to a lot of people. I think the idea of like, this is the norm, social behavior of what it looks like to focus. You are sitting still, you are looking directly ahead, and I don't know, somehow also taking notes while looking directly ahead. Um, and I just don't think that's true for many people. I think if I were to do that, I'm putting on a performance, but I am not taking any information in. It is not how I'm able to focus. For me personally, I have to be doing something with my hands. In my introduction, I said that I knit while in French class. It really helps me focus. It really helps
Mm,
me pay attention to have something like repetitive, that I could just be doing with my hands and taking in information. For me personally, I'm not able to take notes in class, and um, during my undergrad when I got accommodations, I was able to get a note taker. But since then, I found that I don't personally need notes. If I'm able to focus in a way where I'm taking care of my needs to be able to focus, I am m much better able to absorb the information and it stays with me. And then after the class is done, I'm able to take some notes if I need to.
Mm.
Um, and I think we have more awareness of it now, but for people with neurodiversity, with ADHD, like having fidget toys or like something to keep occupied is really helpful. In my French school, one of the teachers there has like a giant bin full of STEM toys that anyone can go and take to help focus. But I think that kind of disrupts what we imagine when we think of like what someone who's focused looks like.
My sense is, having come through the system myself, having educated in it for the past decade or so, that what we're often looking for from our students when they produce their their learning, when they write a test or submit an assignment, is something like agreement with what
Mm,
we as the educator have said. If it's
mm,
not and if not that, then even worse, something like an exact repetition, right?
yeah,
An exact representation. And yet, I think if we were to step back and ask ourselves, how did we come to learn the skills that define our lives now as adults, whether it's our career skills, our interrelational skills, our hobby skills, what have you, um, it's not very often that those came about through just kind of banging our head against a wall over and over again and just memorizing this, the
yeah,
same sequence of information. It comes about often through living through the process of doing
mhm,
whatever that skill is, usually alongside some people who do it better than us. So I'm
mm,
thinking of apprenticeship situations, coaching situations, etc., and usually with a lot of failure, right? Usually with a whole bunch
yes,
of mistakes. So I hope that that context kind of helps spark some ideas for you. But
yeah,
comparing those two different versions of what are both still regularly called learning in our culture,
yeah,
what does it actually mean to learn?
yeah. Oh, I love that you said that. The failure piece actually during my last 3 years there when I was finally had support, I the mantra I made for myself was failure is necessary because I was like so afraid of doing a bad job because you have all these um, messaging that you're doing a bad job. The fear of failure becomes a really big emotional block to a lot of students.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so another part that was really difficult for me was the piece that you're saying that an assignment or a test would be how well could you regurgitate what I told you? And to me, that's not learning, that's not knowledge, or that's not how I see knowledge. To me, how I see it, learning would be s- um, how you can take on knowledge and 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 do it or describe it in your own way instead of I've memorized this. You told me it's right. It must be the right answer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have a really hard time with that, especially because like I said in my introduction, I don't think there's like one right way of knowing things. Um, and I think part of learning is um, learning new things, learning that something you might thought of as the truth completely changes and have that be ongoing for forever throughout your life. I think that's how you build the skill to learn, being open to being wrong, being open to having your ideas changed. Um,
Yeah. And not, yeah, instead of being terrified and angry that those ideas are being contradicted, rather being excited that those ideas are evolving.
yes, yeah, and I think that's where a lot of my um, early conflict in my undergraduate degree came from. Because I'm very curious by nature. I ask a lot of questions because for me, I really want to understand, the foundation of something. If
Mm-hmm.
someone is saying this is what you should know, I want to know, oh, that's cool. How did you get there? Um, what went on, what were the things that went into this for you to know that that's the truth? I'm really curious to know like all those pieces, and I think that's part of learning to fully and deeply understand something, um, and how someone came to be there. Like you said, like an apprenticeship, um, that's kind of how that plays out practically. But um, through through knowledge acquirement,
Mm-hmm.
um, I think like being able to ask questions is really important, and that should be valued and encouraged.
Marielene Imordino Yang out of she was working out of Antonio Damasio's lab at Harvard, is really, really good about emphasizing and proving that all long lasting learning begins with authentic questioning. So, and they've done these wonderful studies based out of some specialist schools in upstate New York where project based learning is being taken to its absolute extreme. These are schools that don't have specific subjects anymore, and they're beginning school years by helping young people to identify big questions that matter to them, and then studying what happens when a student really, really cares about a
Hmm.
question and becomes um, adamant, becomes almost desperate to find answers to it.
Hmm.
And what ends up happening, it looks like, is that they develop expanding systems of thought around ideas, which insist on things like the foundations that you've described. So it doesn't allow for the student to just accept an easy answer and say, oh, well, that explains everything. All right, Earth goes around the sun. I understand the solar system. They keep asking, what's underneath it? What's next
Hmm.
to it? What else besides it? Right? Because their system demands to have all the pieces filled in order to work, and they can feel when something's missing.
Yeah.
That's a state. I think we can understand it intuitively. We don't need all of the psychological literature to get that. But it almost looks as though our education system is built to short circuit that process,
Hmm.
right? Like to almost punish um, the young person who has a desperate question, a really urgently felt question, and is just trying to fill in their system to understand how it
Yeah.
works, right? Like teachers get offended, they get mad
Yeah.
when they're asked too many questions. Which, like in this context of learning, what we've just described looks absurd, right? Like I think if
Yeah.
an alien came down and looked at our education system, they'd be like, "What is your stated mission again?"
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think questions could be seen as like undermining the authority of the teacher. If a teacher is telling you this is it, I don't think it's encouraged to question it. It's like just learn that. But like you're saying, like the learning happens when you're building that foundation there, and wanting to find all the pieces and figure it out. And um, I have an example in grad school, which my grad school was a completely different experience for me for education because I was in social justice education, and it was a very small department. And so it was like very intimate. Even though I was registered with accommodations, I worked directly one-on-one with each teacher to find my accommodations. And for one of my courses, my professor allowed me, instead of writing an academic paper, to create a zine. And maybe when I say that, that sounds outlandish, and like undermining academic rigor. But it
Sounds pretty
was
cool to me,
it was
actually.
so
I love that idea.
cool. It was so cool.
Yeah.
I was able to really showcase my knowledge in a way that made sense to me and in a way that a lot of people would be able to understand as well, which I think is an incredible way of sharing knowledge.
Hmm.
And the feedback I got was that it was clearly incredibly well researched and that I was um, able to communicate really complex, huge topics of Indigenous food sovereignty and food justice in Toronto in a really easily understandable way to the reader.
Hmm.
Um, and my resources were just as long as an academic paper would be, and I writ I wrote just as much. Um, but I was able to do it in a way that just made more sense to me, felt more connected, and it was a topic I was really passionate about, but I don't think I would be able to communicate as clearly in an academic paper because
Yeah.
um, that's just less less my communication style. Not to say that academic papers aren't important, but I
No.
think equally as valuable is other ways of communicating knowledge. And I'm so thankful that she was open to letting me do that. I never
Yeah.
heard of that outside
Oh,
of that experience.
it's such a perfect example. It's a beautiful example of what we talk about often on the show in terms of the hidden curriculum, the expectation that, for example, every student will be able to express themselves best in a structured essay form.
Hmm.
When in fact, we know, as you said, like you were a doodler when you were young, right? You
Hmm.
see in color, and the zine, perhaps the narrative aspects of the zine or the visual and depictive aspects of the zine. The words you used were it made more sense, it felt more connected, and you were passionate about it. So to bring it all
Yeah.
the way back around to what we said at the beginning of this episode, uh, kids don't learn when they don't like, right?
Yeah.
They don't learn when they don't like the setting. They don't learn when they don't like the teacher, and they don't learn when they don't like the subject. A lot of people will take that and say, oh, okay, well, they need to be made to like these things. Or I should
Hmm.
emphasize, they need to be made to like these
Hmm.
things rather than, well, let's find a way of expression that they do like, that does make sense to them, that makes them feel connected to the people around them and maybe feels like they're sharing knowledge rather than siloing it to themselves. And let's see how far that
Yeah.
passion can take them in especially divergent and curious routes of thought.
Hmm.
Um, I know that that's what so many of the educators who are listening and the parents, especially who are listening, want for their learners. So
Yeah.
let's round out this conversation with
Yeah, for
as
sure.
much practical, actionable information as we can. When you're working on yourself and you're learning, when you're working with young people, providing accommodation and access to new ways of thinking and learning, what are strategies, perhaps like mnemonic devices or others, that people can take home with them and start playing around with themselves to really change the dimension through which they see their learning process?
Yeah, great. This is where I love to nerd out on learning strategies
Awesome.
because
Let's get
I'm
it.
a person who loves like systems, like the good kind of systems. And um, I just I have a few that I prepared in advance for the podcast, but
Awesome. Thank you.
um, I wanted to share a few different kinds. I have three different kinds here. But the first one I wanted to start with was building a routine with varying energy, pain, motivation levels.
Hmm.
Um, so this is a learning strategy that might seem irrelevant to some, but I think if you're looking at learning from a holistic viewpoint, making sure you're taking good care of yourself is probably the where I think one should start. Um, and I've been using this learning strategy and sharing it with others for 7 years now. And it was really transformational for me. So I would say everyone has varying energy levels. But in particular, this might be helpful for you if you're living with an illness, disability, or if you have like a big change in life circumstances that makes life harder for you. Um, and with all my learning strategies and also how I see learning is finding ways you can work with yourself instead of working against yourself and like, being hard on yourself and saying, oh, this is how I should do things. And that,
Hmm.
that doesn't work. So how you would practically do this? I suggest starting off by thinking of days where you have the most energy or time, least amount of pain, or the most motivation, expansiveness. What is it that you would want to do with your morning? Or you could do this any type of routine, really, but I'm going to use the example of morning for this situation. So this isn't going to be a routine you do every day. It might not even be frequent because I don't know anyone who wakes up energetic and thrilled every single day. Um, but maybe it's something you feel up to a few times a month, or maybe just once a week on the weekend, or either way, it doesn't matter the frequency in which you're able to do this first routine, but just think of things that you would like to do. So I made an example, although it'll be different for everyone based on your needs and preferences. Um, so your first high energy routine might look like wake up, get out of bed, go to the gym and or walk in the park, maybe for an hour. Bathroom tasks like full shower, grooming. Maybe there's even an added self-care task, a more involved cooked breakfast, and maybe there's some reading or journaling, writing for an hour. Personally, I don't have time in the morning to do this I idealized high energy routine, but when I do and I feel up for it, that's when I would do it. But I'm not hard on myself that it's not something that is achievable frequently.
Yeah.
Um,
I want to interject just one
yeah,
point
for
that's worked
sure.
really well with working with young folks myself, and especially around
Yeah,
scheduling, building a schedule.
yeah.
Our culture is such that our sort of learned tendency when we look at schedules is to think of them kind of like a rat's maze almost
Mm,
like something with walls where like I have to
yeah,
get through this and I have to get through it in this amount of time, and if I don't I
yeah,
have failed.
yeah.
And I like so much better, and I see it at work so much more effectively in the lives of young people and even in my own life. When you view a schedule as something like what you said, an idealized aspiration,
Hmm.
where like if I was feeling my best self today,
Yeah,
if I woke up at the time that I really, really want to wake up and my energy levels were right, this is what I would do. And you can look at something like that at the end of the day and say to yourself, awesome, awesome, good for me. I got 60% of my idealized
yeah,
stuff done, right? Not, oh, you know, dang it, I failed again today.
yeah,
I didn't get that 100. No, like you did 60, and without that
yeah.
schedule, you probably would have gotten 20. So, like,
Hmm.
celebrating um, those small successes, those small wins, I think is a huge part of
Yeah,
building a habit set worth living into.
yeah. And I want to add on to that learning strategies, you're not allowed to use them to bully yourself.
Mm,
They're to support you, not to make you put yourself down.
I like that.
Um, yeah. So then once you have your kind of like idealized high energy, low pain routine, then you can look at it and from that create an average routine. So here you could incorporate, okay, what is the most important for me to get done um, for self-care, but that's realistic for your everyday life. So that might look like wake up and get out of bed instead of an hour of movement? Could it be 15 minutes? Could it look like stretching or um, some movement at home or a quick walk? Um, the bathroom tasks, can you do what's necessary? Maybe that's a shower, maybe it's not. Um, and you have a nourishing breakfast, but maybe it's not as involved or cooked. And maybe reading and journaling instead of an hour, maybe it could be 20 minutes, 15 minutes, kind of taking what's important for you to take care of yourself, but making it realistic and manageable for you. And
Mm,
like you said, not being so rigid with yourself, letting yourself have flexibility if there, like, what are you capable of doing without, I know for me why this is helpful is before if I was, experiencing pain or having a bad day, I'd be like, okay, no routine, throwing it all out because I can't do it all. But then that makes it a lot harder having this like all or nothing mindset.
hmm
So the
Makes it
last
a
one
lot
would,
less productive too.
yeah, exactly. The lastly, building off the other two routines would be your, minimal effort routine. So this would be what you would go to when you're experiencing heightened pain, lower energy, mental health flare up, less motivation. So maybe you wake up and you can stay in bed for a bit if you need. You could even do some light stretching from bed. If your bathroom tasks, you could accommodate yourself as you need. I know there's disposable toothbrushes even you could use from bed if it is a really difficult time to get out of bed. And also there are shower stools if standing and having a physical shower feels like too much effort. Um, as well, you still need to eat, but maybe it could be more low effort.
Mm.
And again, accommodating here, maybe maybe there's some frozen options you could have on hand in preparation for days where you know you might not be able to cook. Maybe that looks like pre-cut fruit or pre-boiled eggs, something that you're still able to nourish yourself within your energy limits. And it, if you're not able to read or journal, maybe you could sit by a window to get some sunlight and plan your day. And that way you're still taking care of yourself. You're still making sure you're well, but you're not aiming for this idealized version of your routine on a daily basis.
Two things
Um,
I want to really quickly bring attention to from what you've just
yeah,
said.
of
First,
course.
it's so refreshing to hear the response to the question, how do I learn better, or what learning strategies should I be using, be immediately about self-care, the body, our circadian rhythms, your felt sense of wellness. Because to be honest, when I asked that question, in my mind, I thought we were going to be talking about, stuff like mnemonic devices
Yeah,
or
for sure.
what's the tomato study
Oh,
routine?
Pomodoro.
The Pomodoro technique. Yeah, I thought we were going to be mentioning stuff like that. So really, really cool to hear this compassionate take. Also, I want to bring a lens from early in the episode back to this because I think if a lot of people were to have just jumped into the pod when we started talking about this and hear about unable to get out of bed, finding standing in the shower too difficult, like I think a lot of people's gut reaction to that is kind of like an eye roll and come on, like, everybody's got to be able to take a shower. We all got to get out of bed. But when you look at it with the kind of compassion that you are, and especially your take from early on where you said, nobody wants to be feeling anger and hatred in the middle of their class setting, right?
Hmm.
Like nobody wants to be disruptive,
Hmm.
right? And when other people are learning, nobody wants to find standing in a shower exhausting
Yeah,
or find it impossible to get out of bed. They're not
yeah,
they're not enjoying this, right? Like,
no,
and when we recognize, as you said, the possibility for mental health flare-ups, the possibility for chronic mental health deficits, and the results that we see where even the smallest amount of physical activity or self care can really be can look like a mountain to climb.
Hmm.
What you've just said and the techniques you've just described can be the difference between a really nasty negative spiral that just gets worse and worse day
Hmm.
to day, and the possibility of recovery and hope and improvement.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. And I think where I'm coming from is, even if the societal norm is, everyone should be able to shower, everyone should have the energy to do this. The reality is that's not the reality for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so instead of seeing people as problems, deficient, um, is there another way we could could look at it? Could see that um, we can build in support for each other and greater understanding. And I also think at some point in everyone's life, they might experience a period, short or prolonged, where they might be unable to do what are seen as simple self-care tasks. Um, and so that's why I say that, um, learning strategies are for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Because I really think everyone can benefit from accommodating themselves in this way. Um,
I couldn't
I,
agree
I, d-
more.
I don't know if I believe that there's anyone who wakes up every day feeling the exact same, perfect, ready to take on the day. Like,
No matter how much Instagram is trying to convince us that they do.
yeah, I'm not sure that's real. I think what's real is that we're human. We have difficult lives and we have varying needs, and those change day to day. Yeah.
You said it. We're just about out of time here, but I want to make sure
Okay.
we just get your thoughts and anything that you want to put out there to the listeners in terms of other people that we might be tuning into, resources, opportunities that people can take further in their own lives to continue this really life affirming attitude that I think you've brought to the show.
Yes. So just really quickly, I wanted to share two resources. The first one is an illustrated guide. I actually have a copy here that I have from the library for
Cool.
those who are watching. It's called Special Topics in Being a Human, a queer and tender guide to things I've learned the hard way about caring for people, including myself,
Wow.
by S. Bear Bergman. It's really great. It's an illustrated guide. I recommend this to everyone. Some of the topics in here, which offer practical advice, um, of navigating like some of the complexities in life, is how to make big decisions in a way that matches your values, how to how to take criticism, how to be yourself. And another aspect I really like about the book is after each chapter, there's a short summary, so people are able to get the key takeaways,
Great.
if reading feels difficult for you to keep track of.
It sounds,
Um,
as you've mentioned before, very accessible. It also strikes me that
yeah,
none of the topics that you just mentioned, even though I think we'd all agree, hard to find something more important than that, none of them were topics that I learned about in school.
exactly, but are all really important life skills to have.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, especially I would say, thinking that young people age 16 could decide what they would like to do for their career. That seems like a very big decision
Yeah.
that you would have to make in your life. And it would be important to know how to make a big decision taking your values into account.
Mm-hmm. You said, okay.
And
Well, that'll definitely go in the show notes.
great. And lastly, I wanted to also recommend another book. It's a Wellbeing Learning Guide. Feel Good Learning on How to Prioritize, Focus, Study, and Learn Everything Better, written
Mm-hmm.
by Dina Kara Schaefer.
It's one of my go-to
Um,
manuals these days.
it's incredible. If you're really interested in like how to learn, there's so much wealth of knowledge in there. Everything Dina does is just so full of care and it's palpable in the book. Like as you're reading it, you really feel that she cares for you as a learner. Um, and that's my suggestion to anyone who ever asks me about wanting to know more learning strategies. There's so much in there from scheduling, studying for exams, um, writing, um, all the good stuff for
Yeah, getting through
strategies there.
distraction, overcoming procrastination,
Exactly.
all the questions. Folks, if you've got a learner out there, if you're a learner yourself, I know I've said it before, it's been in the show notes before, I'll say it again, and it's going in these notes as well. Dina Kara Schaefer's Feel Good Learning is a manual that's not to be missed.
Absolutely. And also just anything that Dina Kara Schaefer does. She also runs an Instagram account, Awaken Learning, and she shares a lot of resources for free there, a lot of helpful tips and tools. Would highly recommend it.
Totally agreed. Well, I mean, it's been a joy. I love talking to educators like yourself who I would just say get it and are meeting people where they are and seeing them for who they are and using that as a starting point for care rather than a whole series of prescribed expectations. That's the core message of this show. And it's been a pleasure just vibing it back and forth for the last hour with you.
Thank you so much, Mike. It was such an honor to meet you and get to speak and yeah, just really feeling understood and everything you said, I'm going to be thinking about for a long time. And I really appreciate your insight and your knowledge and having me here with you today.
Wow. Well, thank you. And right back at you. Yeah, this is a conversation that's going to bounce around in my head for some time. Uh, just want to encourage you keep doing this beautiful work that you're doing and all the success and health and joy in the future.
Thank you so much. You too.
All right. For the listeners, this has been another episode of the Braemar Life Skills Academy podcast. We'll be back again soon with more conversations just like this one. Thanks for listening.